start of this project was actually a request from the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum within ASI, who asked the board of directors in December 2023 to develop guidance materials in order to facilitate the implementation of FPIC within ASI operations. FPIC, Free Prior and Informed Consent, is, as many of our certified entities know, a mandatory part of the performance standard. But it's a concept that for many, both Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, is a foreign concept. But actually, it is not really hard to understand, because it's all about the self-determination, about the rights of Indigenous people to decide over their own lives, their own culture, their own place on earth. And in order to facilitate that, we started a process to develop 3 guidance documents. One guidance document for the implementation of FPIC aimed primarily at ASI certified companies, the entities. One guidance document for the implementation of FPIC aimed primarily at Indigenous people. And finally, one guidance document, a checklist for the implementation and verification of FPIC aimed primarily at auditors who check the compliance with the performance standard. And it might be, someone might wonder, do we need to have a guidance document for Indigenous people? I mean, this is about Indigenous people. Do they not know about FPIC? And the answer is actually no. Most Indigenous people are not aware of the concept of FPIC. They are very much aware about their rights and about their place on the earth and in their cultural landscape. But the concept of FPIC is constructed very much out from international law, and which is not something that a majority of Indigenous people are aware of. So that's why it was also very important to develop a guidance document primarily aimed at Indigenous people. So that's how we started this process.
Now, that's good background, Anders. I think one of the other components of this is the raising awareness of the process for, or the implementation of FPIC for those Indigenous communities, so that they can better engage with the entities. And as you said, with the guidance, the checklist for auditors, it's important that we support auditors to better understand implementation of FPIC, so that they can then verify if it has been implemented according to the performance standard and the better practice process.
Yeah, that is true. When we are looking at FPIC, I mean, it's an abstract concept, and it can be regarded as a right, and as a right, it's very much depending on international law, but it's also a principle and a process. And as a principle, it's a part of the ASI Performance Standard, but as a process, it's a way of communicating and creating relations between certified entities and Indigenous people. And this has to be done with a protocol that is taking aware of the Indigenous culture, and it's also therefore important to learn or guide the Indigenous people to be a good counterpart in those processes. But how can we define the concept of FPIC? Free, what is that? Well, it means that you are looking for a consent well in advance of any activities you are planning within your aluminum plant or within your bauxite mine. Prior and free, there should be no harassment, no pressure on the Indigenous people, so they really feel that they are in a free situation. And prior, of course, means that it should have been done well in advance of any activities. Informed means that we are seeking to inform Indigenous people to an extent where they can make an informed decision about if they are going to give consent or not. And consent is finally the decision that is made by the Indigenous community together, because FPIC is a collective right. So the decision that has to be taken should be taken using the traditional way of making decisions in a collective way. So that is FPIC, if you compress it into a few words. And to describe that process is equally important for the certifying entities, the Indigenous communities, and for the auditors. So we are all playing the same ball game.
Yeah. And in what kind of situations should the FPIC process be applied or used?
Well, according to our standard, every time you are potentially impacting an Indigenous people or their community with your activities, whether it is in the direct area of impact around a bauxite mine or around a smelter, but it also stretches out to the associated facilities, something that might have or add an impact to your activities. Could be a railway line, could be a windmill park, it could be a harbor that is essential for your operations. So anything within in the direct area of impact or within the associated area, if you have activities that might have an adverse impact on Indigenous people, then you should apply the FPIC and process and start that process.
Now, well, they're good points, Anders, and to add to that, it also includes if you're expanding some of these facilities, it could be if you're further developing a port and making it significantly larger, you're closing a mine site, so you're then going through the FPIC process with those communities to determine what the mine closure planning could or should look like. And importantly, as you said before, with ensuring to support the Indigenous communities' engagement and cultural practice, is to ensure that all of the community members are represented in that FPIC process. And that can be challenging sometimes with entities that might have an agreement with certain communities, and those agreements say that they should talk to certain representatives of the communities, which is good, and they must do that. However, for an FPIC process, it can be broader than that as well, to ensure there's a voice for the marginalised or other members of that same community. So that inclusive cultural process, as you said earlier, is very important.
Mm. Yes, it is. And this might sometimes become a conflict because there might be a situation in a community where someone is very eager to speak for the whole community. And if you don't understand that this person is not speaking for the collective, then you might end up in the wrong way. So you have to be careful as an entity when you approach a community. Some companies might see this as a threat or as an obstruction of their right to perform their industrial activities. But I think this should be more seen as an opportunity to create good relation and good respect for rights, and to create a situation where the Indigenous communities and your company all share a vision about what is a sustainable development of this area.
Yes, and all of these things are very detailed within the guidance documents, and those guidance documents, as you described, are in three main parts, and they're further supported by a poster that is a graphic representation of implementation of FPIC and that circular approach with the various key steps, plus the PowerPoint presentation that provides a further level of detail, but still a summary of the FPIC implementation process. And finally, the additional support is a video that was put together by the ASI educational team some time ago, which further explores and describes what FPIC is. So the guidance materials that you've led the development of and is supported by the other Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum members and Secretariat staff is aimed at enabling all people with different levels of understanding and awareness and education in various main languages enables them to better understand FPIC implementation.
That is true. When we're coming into the guidance how to perform, we are dividing this into 9 steps, 3 preparatory steps and 6 performance steps when it comes to implement an FPIC process, and the same steps for the entities and for the communities. And we will start with 3 preparatory steps, and it's very important that you are well prepared before you go into the FPIC process, and that goes for the entities as well as for the Indigenous community. And we are giving some advice on how to do that. The material itself is quite comprehensive, and we do not expect that everyone within a management level or within a community will read all the material, but we think it's good if a smaller group of people who are going to work with this really study this topic thoroughly and follow the recommendations step by step. Prepare yourself and then come into the real FPIC process. And it's also important to say that even if you have a 6-step process, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will follow all steps. The process might stop somewhere in the middle because you are not coming together in a consensus way. And that has to be respected if the no to proceed is based on an informed ground. We do not want to have arbitrary processes where people are acting through their spine saying, no, I don't want to deal with you. We want both the Indigenous people and the entities to work seriously in this process. But if you have seriously concerned based on information, then you can stop the process and it has to be respected. The final step is when we have gone through gathering information, negotiation, discussing implementation of compensation or mitigation measures, then you finalize this in an agreement. And the agreement is then the base for your future cooperation and your future relationship. If then things happen, you start a new branch within your industrial activities, you expand the bauxite mine or anything, then you restart the process. But if you have done this properly, then you already have established a relation, you have a lot of information. So the next time you are going into an FPIC process, it will be much, much easier. So an FPIC is not a tick in the box and a one-off process. It is a continuous relation that you will have between the entity and the Indigenous people throughout the life cycle of your activities. And if you do this right, then this will be an opportunity to create good relations, to avoid conflicts, but also respect when Indigenous people's rights are threatened, and respect not to proceed if they are threatened.
Yeah.
That's right. Sorry, Jess, you go.
No, thanks, Mark. It's a very good point to raise because I think there can be a bit of a misconception that if you go through the FPIC process, the end result will automatically be consent, but that's not actually the case. It's the importance of going through the process to see whether the community consent, and if they do not, then respecting that decision as a no. So that's a really important point to raise.
There's only one more point I think it'd be good to make is that consent may be provided with conditions, and those conditions could be for the protection of cultural or sacred sites or important environmental areas. So I think there's a consent to support or an informed decision not to support whatever the development is, but the one in between is consent with those conditions.
Yes, and I think it's also important to say that this is not a digital, I mean, it's not just a yes or a no. It could be a modified yes or a modified no. So anything that comes out from the final negotiation, and even if you have, as Mark says, a consent to proceed, then if the company, the entity, is breaching what you have been agreed on, then a yes can be a no. And that has also been that's also to be respected.
Good point. Is there anything else, Anders, that you'd like to add to the discussion?
Yeah, one thing maybe. Sometimes some companies tend to think, and I'm not only talking about the ASI company, but companies around the world tend to see FPIC as a veto. And as you know, a veto is an unconditional right to say yes or no to something. And we don't see it that way. We see that an FPIC process, a decision from an indigenous community should be based on good information. It should be an informed decision. And in order to have a really informed decision, we are advocating for a kind of participatory cumulative impact assessment where Indigenous people take an active part in the process. And we have developed a guidance document even for that material, which can also be found within the ASI website. And if you are working according to what we call the IPCIA model for cumulative impact assessment, then the concerned Indigenous community, they will be pretty informed when they make their decision.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very important component. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we might add is that now when we have this guidance document, we are now also discussing and planning for training of the documents, because one thing is to read about it, but it's also good if we can develop training modules to make a greater understanding of the FPIC concept. And that is something that we are working on, and that will gradually be developed within ASI.
Jess, is there anything else you think we should ask Anders to convey?
No, I think this was great. I think we covered a really good range of things today, and hopefully this conversation will support those who are learning about FPIC, implementing the FPIC process, and trying to understand the need and the reason why these guidance documents and supporting materials were created. I think, yeah, this is something that we've been hearing that there's been such a great need for. So it's very good that these materials are now being released, and will support all of ASI members and wider to implement the FPIC process correctly.